In this month's podcast, I will discuss the terminology of conflict simulations and wargames, tell you what's happening in Warfighter Corner, talk about a new game from Vento Nuovo Games, and list the coming attractions for October 2024 on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel, all on Speak Out and Play. Hello, and welcome to Speak Out and Play, a monthly podcast for the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. Each month I will discuss what is going on in terms of new videos for the channel, but I will also tackle other subjects that I hope are worthy of discussion as well. As the heat of summer turns into the heat of fall in Oklahoma, I'd like to discuss the subject of conflict simulations. If they are more than war games, then what types of games do they cover? And perhaps more importantly, does the move toward the phrase conflict simulation mean a change in how we perceive war games? I grew up a fan of George Carlin, a comedian who built his career on observing the humorous nature of the meaning of words. The English language is rife with words that carry double meanings, sometimes several meanings depending on how they're used. And this is certainly true when it comes to the field of gaming. Even though I've been playing war games since the mid-1970s, there are still some terms that I am only now becoming more familiar with. One of those terms that has been used recently is conflict simulation. I've seen it used in some marketing efforts along with awards that I normally associate with war games, so instead of just complaining first and reaping the consequences later, I thought I would investigate exactly what a conflict simulation game is, what the definition of a war game is, what the differences are between the two, and then I would complain and reap the consequences of my complaints. So, let's start with, what is a conflict simulation? Well, a conflict simulation is a strategic game that replicates military conflicts or battles. It involves tactical decision-making, resource management, and scenario-based problem solving. Players control units, make strategic choices, and simulate outcomes, providing a realistic experience of warfare or conflict situations for education, analysis, or entertainment. Now, the definition of a war game that I found is that a war game is a simulation game that models military operations, strategies, and tactics, often set in historical, fictional, or contemporary conflicts. Players assume the role of commanders, make decisions on troop movements, resource management, and battle strategies. War games are used for training, education, analysis, and entertainment, blending realism with gameplay. Well, they sound pretty much alike. So what are the differences between a conflict simulation and a war game? Well, conflict simulation games and war games are often used interchangeably, but they do have subtle differences. War games are a subset of conflict simulation games specifically focused on military operations, emphasizing historical accuracy, strategy, and tactical decision-making. They replicate battles, campaigns, or military scenarios, allowing players to explore various strategies and outcomes. Conflict simulation games encompass a broader range of conflicts that include non-military scenarios like political struggles, economic rivalries, and social movements. They may involve diplomacy, negotiation, and multiple forms of conflict beyond warfare. While all war games are conflict simulations, not all conflict simulations are war games, and they may represent different types of conflicts and dynamics. So, games that are focused on political, economic, diplomatic, and social movements may be considered a conflict simulation. But that leads me to a bit more confusion than anything else, and I'll tell you why by breaking down both words, conflict and simulation. Now, just about every game is a conflict of some sort. Even cooperative games are conflicts, since everyone is teamed up to overcome the AI or bot as opponent. Even games in which there is no direct conflict, such as Settlers of Catan, for example, they do have the players competing against each other to accumulate points. And in that accumulation of points, players may cut off the route of competitors when it comes to building roads. That's just one example. To put it another way, I'm not sure what the limiting factor is in the term conflict. It seems to encompass all forms of conflict or competition within a game, including direct conflict between players, between players and the bot or automated opponent, or indirect actions that benefit one side or the other in such a conflict. So with that, let's move on to the other word, simulation. The term simulation is a tricky one because it can mean different things to different people. First and foremost, simulation is mostly used as a marketing term. There are uncounted number of war games that include simulation as part of their advertising. Now, the one that stands out for me is the Avalon Hill game Guerrilla, which is currently out of print. Guerrilla is a card game that is ostensibly set in Central America, but it really has no setting. Everything about it is generic in nature. There is nothing about it that is based in any historical or even theoretical event, and yet the very first sentence on the back of the box declares the game to be a simulation. At best, the term simulation is up to the individual. What you might think tries to simulate something may not be what others think. Now let's take another game, Kremlin. That's another game that Avalon Hill produced back in the late 1980s, although it came from another company. Clearly, Kremlin is a game of political conflict that has a historic setting. The factions and individuals are made up, but the overall era and focus of the conflict is not generic. So is Kremlin a conflict simulation? Well, the answer is a definite maybe. Again, Kremlin is clearly aimed at being a game and has relatively few rules. But just because a game has a lot of rules, has the trappings of other games that are considered simulations, is advertised as a simulation, it doesn't make it a simulation. Kremlin has relatively few rules, but it does do a pretty good job of simulating, or at least replicating in some sense, the goings-on inside the Kremlins in terms of the power struggles that have happened over the decades. If anything, games like Kremlin and Guerrilla achieve endings that can be considered realistic, even if the overall focus is more along the lines of a game rather than a simulation. In fact, many games that are simplistic in nature often come up with results that could be considered historic, or at least along the lines of realism, just because of the nature of the conflict themselves. Now, to take this further down the rabbit hole, one aspect of chit or card and board or print wargaming, as I call it, is that the term is often used to describe the physical form of the game and not just the topic. Now, just to straighten this out, for example, Eurogame describes a particular set of mechanics that many board games use for play. The topic can be just about anything, but the rules of the game follow the form of a Eurogame. Now, a war game is really the opposite of a Eurogame, because war is a topic, but the mechanics are not preset. Games such as Blue and Gray, Up Front, and the Undaunted series have very different mechanics, but they all have the same topic, war, which makes them war games. And yet, because so many war games have been created with a map, hexes, and counters, the term war game is often used to describe not just the topic, but the specific form or mechanics, which makes discussion of war games and conflict simulations even more difficult because the references are often different. Despite having played war games for decades, I still believe the term is a topic, not a series of mechanics. Now, others can certainly see this differently, and perhaps that is one reason why the term conflict simulation has come up. So, to clean all this up, the term conflict simulation also seems to be an alternate term to wargame, which may make it friendlier to use on YouTube channels, for example, that want to reach a larger audience. After all, a channel devoted to conflict simulations sounds less warlike than a term wargaming. So it may escape the algorithms that otherwise might prevent gamers in non-wargaming fields from seeing videos from wargame-oriented channels on non-wargames. So is that clear as mud? I think so. What I can say is that the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel covers mostly wargames, with some conflict simulations, and the odd RPG in a box known as Fortune and Glory. But what about Warfighter? Well, let's find out more in this month's Warfighter Corner. Warfighter Vietnam is still front and center, so I have little to add to what I did before, what I did last month when I did my podcast. The second in a series of videos about the game was released earlier this month, and there'll be at least 2 more to follow in the coming months. So the question is, what new iteration of Warfighter will come out next? Now, I do know that one project which is being kicked around and worked on is a ninja version of Warfighter, which really sounds intriguing. I mean, Warfighter Ninja? I mean, come on, who wouldn't go for that? It is currently in the playtesting stage and seems to offer many of the attributes of standard Warfighter with rules that augment its shadowy aspects. So I often think that Warfighter is at its best when it does resistance-oriented stuff like the Maquis or the Italian Partisans, and since the ninja version seems to be kind of along the same lines, it could be that way as well, especially if you include the Shadow War aspects or Night aspects in the game. Now, there are still Near Future and the Cold War cold sets that have been in development for some time. But there are also still openings in my favorite period, which is World War II, which may be addressed soon as well, or maybe not. I really have no idea what's next, but what I am saying is that World War II still has at least two major openings for core sets, the Russia Theater and the China-Burma-India Theater. Now, both Russia and China have expansion packs, but there's simply not enough to cover either theater of war. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if they came out with two Russian core sets, one that covers Operation Barbarossa to Stalingrad, and then the next that covers the Russian counteroffensive, namely Kursk, through the end of the war. Now, the China-Burma-India Theater is fascinating, to me at least, and certainly massive, although I do not believe it would need two core sets to cover, but hey, who am I to say no to that? Given that the Second Sino-Japanese War, which started in 1937, was so huge that it could be considered the true start of World War II, that area would cover conflicts between Japanese and Russian forces, both in the early stages, which happened before the outbreak of war in Europe, to the later stages when Russia did launch an attack against Japan just before it surrendered. Now, it's been a few years since we've seen a World War II core set come out, and given their popularity, I would expect one to arrive fairly soon, but we're going to have to wait and see. Until we see what is next from DVG concerning the Warfighter series, let's look at what's in the works for the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. Vento Nuovo Games has announced a new game that takes the company for the first time into the realm of science fiction, DNA Voyager. The setting is a post-apocalyptic Earth in which life is being extinguished at a rapid rate. The only hope is to board the Voyager, a massive ship that's heading toward Proxima Centauri at Warp 10. While on board, you will need to synthesize nucleotide triplets and inoculate them with plasma catalyst before arriving at the destination. The goal is to save humanity from extinction by having everything ready by the time the ship reaches Proxima Centauri. The game can be played by from 1 to 4 participants, and it's on the lighter end of the complexity scale. Now, the Kickstarter is scheduled to start, if it hasn't started already, it is scheduled to start by the end of this month, and it marks an interesting turn for Vento Nuovo Games. As you might suspect, I created a 1-minute teaser for the Kickstarter, which uses both game components and the artwork. Although it's not a light game by any means, the rules are rather compact, which makes it open to family along with solo play. It's certainly a new direction for the company, which is most famous for its block war games and focus on World War II, and also having games on the Napoleonic period along with a World War I game. And with that, let's look at what's coming out for the month of October on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. The first Wednesday in October brings a double feature of videos, starting with a personal essay about conflict simulations as role-playing games. This essay is a personal expression about the role-playing elements found in many war games, especially man-to-man tactical games such as Warfighter. This short video is designed to showcase the connections that can be created when playing war games with role-playing in mind. The second video continues the series on Fortune and Glory, with a focus on cooperative villain rules. The short video covers the basic setup, victory conditions, and the villain phase, which includes events, outpost, and adventure steps. Also demonstrated are the actions of the villain, which include searching for artifacts, returning to base, and how to use the villain track. For the second Wednesday of October, Seek Out and Play presents Warfighter 29, Canada. The short video presents the Canadians in the Warfighter 29 series, which creates 29-point teams for missions. In this video, a Canadian team was created for the European theater in the post-D-Day actions of the war. You are encouraged to create and post your own 29-point teams using the Canadian expansions. The Warfighter 29 series is designed to create small teams that makes it easier for new players to get started and provide new challenges for veterans of the Warfighter system. The third Wednesday of October brings the spirit of Halloween to Seek Out and Play YouTube channel with a double feature of spooky delights, starting with the optional rules for the DVG game Rise of the Zombies. This short video showcases the optional rules, which includes how to keep stronger zombies from arriving early, the Otis rule where players can attack each other, and the campaign game in which 3 games are played and the points are totaled up to decide the winner. Next are the optional rules for the out-of-print Uquinto Classic, Attack of the Mutants. The video covers adding additional walls, lowering the fire rate of the Janabots, the overwhelming odds rule, bugging out, and using hidden movement. For the fourth Wednesday of October, Seek Out and Play YouTube channel presents the annual playthrough of Attack of the Mutants. This is not a traditional playthrough, but rather an actual game that has been transcribed into a dramatic radio program. Listen as the desperate humans try to hold off the mutant horde long enough to escape the Earth. Will they succeed? Find out when you tune into the annual Attack of the Mutants playthrough on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. Check out more videos when you subscribe to the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel. In addition, there is a monthly Speak Out and Play podcast, which you can find on Buzzsprout and Spotify. For just $2 per month, you can support the channel by becoming a Patreon member and see the videos and podcast 48 to 72 hours in advance. At least one new video is released every week on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel, so I will see you next Wednesday. And that's it for this edition of Speak Out and Play podcast. Thank you for listening. You can check out the podcast on the Monday before the last Wednesday of each month on Buzzsprout and Spotify. The video version is posted on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel on the last Wednesday of each month. Patreon members will have access to the podcast 72 hours in advance for the audio-only version and 48 hours in advance for the video version. A new video is released each week on the Seek Out and Play YouTube channel, so I will see you next Wednesday. And if you see Sally, bring her all the way home.